Queen biopic Bohemian Rhapsody did plenty of playing with the truth, but the movie's fabrications are only half as bad as the things it totally left out. Here's how Bohemian Rhapsody ignored the true story of Queen. That scene where Freddie Mercury meets his future bandmates and wows them with his singing voice is good for a meet-cute, but that's not really how it all went down. The movie leaves out the fact that Freddie Mercury, Brian May, and Roger Taylor actually knew each other before they were all a band together. In real life, Mercury was also friends with Tim Staffel, the dude who quits the band in a huff in Bohemian Rhapsody. The truth is, there was no ugly incident preceding Staffel's departure. Staffel himself wrote in Esquire, "My departure from Smile was completely amicable. Freddie and I were good friends at college. Freddie joining the band was very natural, as he was really good friends with the band members before I left and simply dovetailed in. In fact, these guys were all part of a close-knit group of musicians who were constantly joining and quitting each other's bands." Staffel wrote, "You couldn't separate the social aspect from the musical aspect. So we had a big pool of musical friends that would combine and recombine, trying different band ideas out. Freddie socialized with us, we socialized with Freddie. Eventually, they hit on just the right combo, and the rest is history, just not quite as Bohemian Rhapsody tells it." Bohemian Rhapsody totally skims over the fact that Queen went through 3 other bassists before John Deacon finally joined the band. In the film, Deacon joins Queen almost immediately after Mercury does, but in reality, it took a lot longer than that. According to a 1996 profile of Deacon in Bassist and Bass Techniques magazine, Deacon hit it off with the band partly thanks to his quiet demeanor and less than flamboyant playing style. Queen's previous bass players were reportedly too showy in their performance styles, drawing attention away from the other band members, the opposite of what they wanted in a bassist. But the eventual union between Queen and Deacon still wasn't love at first sight. Deacon saw Queen perform in October 1970 and reportedly did not find them to be that interesting of a band. But then in early 1971, a mutual friend formally introduced Deacon to May and Taylor, and for some reason, Deacon had a change of heart. Once he joined up with the group, Deacon became known as the yin to the other's yang. Roger Taylor would later tell the Daily Mail, "We were so used to each other and so over the top, we thought that because he was quiet, he would fit in with us without too much upheaval." He was a great bass player, too.
Cheers!
In the film, Queen sells their touring van so they can afford to make their first album. Shortly after that, they meet their new manager, John Reid, and everything suddenly falls into place. But the film skipped over a ton of drama that happened before they got to that point. In real life, the band didn't sell a van, they sold their souls. Well, kind of. Queen's first manager wasn't John Reid, but a man called Norman Sheffield, co-owner of Trident Studios. According to The Guardian, after Queen's album Sheer Heart Attack made it to number 2, the band was left wondering why they weren't rolling in cash. As it turns out, it was because they'd signed a somewhat predatory contract with Trident, which basically said Queen would make the albums and Trident would sell them to EMI, meaning there wouldn't be enough money left over for the band to buy a new set of drumsticks, much less anything else. The band was so angry about the arrangement that they wrote a super unflattering ode to Sheffield called Death on Two Legs, dedicated to. That song was so harsh that Brian May even later admitted he felt bad singing it. It called Sheffield, among other things, a sewer rat decaying in a cesspool of pride, and angered the band's former manager so much that he decided to sue Queen and EMI for defamation of character. Paul Printer is the undisputed villain of Bohemian Rhapsody. He keeps Mercury locked away in his own mansion, answers all of his calls for him, shuns all of his friends, and is implied to be the reason why Mercury contracted HIV. But the extent of the real Paul Printer's villainy is debatable. It is true that he sold Mercury out to the media in 1987, but the idea that Mercury was isolated and shut away by Printer is almost totally fictional. In reality, Mercury definitely didn't spend all his time in his home waiting for Printer to bring the party to him. He had a whole entourage of people and spent plenty of time with them at nightclubs and parties. In those days, his entourage included not just Paul Printer, but the likes of actor Peter Straker, Elton John, and Princess Diana. The movie doesn't show any of that, though, because it would have jumbled the narrative and turned Printer into a more watered-down villain. And at some point in every film, you gotta have somebody to hate. In the movie, Mary Austin insists to Mercury that he's gay, and from that point onwards, the movie continues by portraying Mercury as a man who is only interested in men. While this may have simplified the narrative a bit, it was far from the whole story. In reality, Mercury was a lot more complicated than that. The truth is that he didn't just go on to have relationships with men alone, but also with women, and the film excluded all of the latter. According to biography, Mercury had a number of relationships with men, including Jim Hutton, who does actually have a part in Bohemian Rhapsody. During the 1980s, however, he also had a relationship with German actress Barbara Valentine. The two met in Munich and even shared an apartment, although, to be fair, she would later describe him as, quote, mostly gay. Of course, her presence in the film would have complicated the more simplistic narrative the filmmakers had in mind, so instead of telling Mercury's story in all of its romantically complex glory, they opted to let viewers believe that Mercury was strictly gay. In Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie Mercury is depicted as focusing on a single musical pursuit, Queen, with a short sidetrack for some solo stuff. In reality, however, Mercury collaborated with many other artists and musicians, including a famous opera singer named Montserrat Caballé. Mercury met Caballé in 1987, and their creative union produced one of the world's most influential marriages of classical and contemporary music, the anthem Barcelona. That's probably not especially shocking, though, since even Queen newcomers will know about Mercury's fondness for opera. It's a huge part of the Bohemian Rhapsody song, after all. What might surprise even Queen fans, however, is that Mercury also performed with the Royal Ballet, though he did require a little convincing before he agreed to take part. After initially thinking they must have been mad to consider him, Mercury was eventually convinced to perform after speaking with the head of EMI, who was also chairman of the Royal Ballet's Board of Governors. You don't become a ballet dancer overnight, though, and Mercury later recalled his punishing practice sessions in the London Evening News. He said of his training, "It was murder. After 2 days, I was in agony. It was hurting me in places I didn't know I had, dear." Mercury made his ballet debut in October 1979 in front of an audience of 2,500 theater patrons. He told the London Evening News, "I wasn't quite Baryshnikov, but it wasn't bad for an aging beginner. I'd like to see Mick Jagger or Rod Stewart try that." It's not just his side projects outside of the arena rock realm that Bohemian Rhapsody leaves out. The movie also doesn't really touch on any of Mercury's many musical collaborations with artists in the rock genre, or the friendships he forged with some of the greatest musicians of his time. You probably already know that he was acquainted with David Bowie, if only because of Under Pressure, Queen's iconic collaborative song with the Thin White Duke. But they didn't just meet as fellow rock stars. Mercury's relationship with Bowie went all the way back to his college years when Bowie played a gig at Mercury's university, and Mercury helped him push a bunch of desks together to make a stage. Mercury recorded with other big names too, including Michael Jackson. In 1983, the pair worked together on the songs There Must Be More to Life Than This, State of Shock, and Victory, but the songs were never released. Why? Because of a llama. Yes, the recording sessions were interrupted by Jackson's pet llama, and Mercury couldn't take it, finally calling manager Jim Beach and begging to be rescued. He told Beach, "You gotta get me out of here. I'm recording with a llama. I've had enough and I want to get out." Freddie Mercury's decline was slow and quiet. Practically none of it is depicted in Bohemian Rhapsody because producers decided to give the film a triumphant ending rather than a tragic one. In real life, Mercury's AIDS diagnosis didn't actually come until 2 years after the iconic Live Aid performance, and he lived for another 4 years after that. So while the movie's ending may feel inspiring, it's also one of the movie's most misleading distortions, potentially affecting how audiences view the legendary real-life concert. Like many of the movie's distortions, it's based on a kernel of truth. Years after the Live Aid performance, when Queen made an appearance at the 1990 Brit Awards, Mercury was gaunt and pale and said little to the audience. Outside of the public eye, however, Mercury kept on working. Brian May later explained to The Telegraph, "Freddie wanted his life to be as normal as possible. For him, the studio was an oasis, a place where life was just the same as it always had been. He loved making music. He lived for it." According to The Telegraph, Mercury kept recording until he could no longer do it. His last session was in May 1991, and the last song he recorded was Made in Heaven's Mother Love, recorded between the 13th and the 16th of that month. But at that point in his life, he was very sick. May explained, "We got as far as the penultimate verse, and he said, 'I'm not feeling that great. I'll finish it when I come back next time.' But of course, he didn't ever come back to the studio after that." Mercury died in November of that same year, and Brian May sang the last verse of Mother Love. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.